Thank you very much, Laurent. Good morning, everybody. Well, as Laurent's explained, financial instruments have become an increasingly important tool of cohesion policy. But I think one thing to mention is that although they've gained an increasingly high profile, the amounts are still rather small. In the 7 to 13 period, it was around about 11 billion of structural fund monies over 7 years, and among 25 countries. Several member states didn't use them. That amounts to just about 3% of the structural funds. So it's a niche tool of implementation. In terms of how things play out and what are the main territory-related drivers and obstacles for using FIs, I think one of the notable things is that, in fact, there is no consistent territorial pattern. There's instead a kind of a mosaic of situations created by an interaction of a number of drivers, and those are essentially fourfold. The first relates to the domestic context. Those are issues like culture, the extent to which businesses and other project promoters are used to using grants rather than subsidies. Another is experience. Financial instruments are complicated to implement, and many managing authorities have struggled with the challenges of doing that. Related to that is the issue of administrative capacity and whether there's the in-house expertise in order to implement this kind of tool. The second group of drivers relates to the operational program objectives, and here it's important to recognise that financial instruments are not suitable for every kind of project. Far from it, in fact. And so an important question is whether financial instruments fit with the objectives of the operational program. The third issue relates to the size of cohesion policy allocations. Now, in general terms, you can say that the issue of critical mass is quite an important issue for financial instruments. But in fact, managing authorities have rather different or diverse responses to the question of scale of cohesion policy and the use of financial instruments. In a number of cases, managing authorities simply decide that the amounts involved are too small to be worth the administrative hassle of using the monies for financial instruments. On the other hand, some managing authorities conclude that because the amounts that they have are small, this is a good opportunity to use financial instruments on a pilot basis and create a legacy that can be used in future. So they need to make the money work more. The last group of drivers relates to the presence of existing financial instruments and financial institutions. These are hugely important, but again, countries and managing authorities respond in different ways to their existence. In some cases, they use the structural funds to complement existing instruments and essentially provide another credit line or another block of finance to complement something that's already happening. In other cases, they invent or pilot or create completely new structures and instruments that are freestanding and separate from what already exists. So there are quite different approaches to that, and also in the instruments that are actually used. One thing to mention that is quite rare in this context is to have financial instruments that actually target regional or territorial disadvantage. And the principal reason for that, I would argue, is that the regulatory constraints mean that there is pressure on drawing money down as rapidly as possible and not constraining the use of financial instruments. Moving on to the second set of questions, how can regions and cities benefit best from using ESIF financial instruments? The first question, as I mentioned, is first of all to decide whether financial instruments are suitable at all. They're only suitable for projects which generate cost savings or have the capacity to generate revenue and are in line with operational program objectives. And that means that in the majority of cases, grants are likely still to be the most suitable types of instruments to use. The second issue is to, or the second need is to conduct an ex-ante assessment to establish what the financial needs are. This is important because if you're designing a market-led instrument, there is no benefit to be gained from crowding out the private market. That would be completely counterproductive. The third issue is to tailor the financial products to the local context. So if there is an antipathy, for instance, towards the use of equity finance, or you have a relatively sparsely populated area, you're unlikely to have the business ecosystem and critical mass to make that work. Fourth, nurture trust and good relations with financial intermediaries. This is an issue of time and experience. Related to that is the issue of administrative capacity. That can affect the kind of instruments that can be used. The next two are related. Monitor progress with implementation and adapt what's done in response to changes in the market. And lastly, refine policy based on experience. There are elements of transferability between different contexts. You can be a magpie and pick lessons from different economic environments. But what we've seen is that the key is to learn within the region and within the programme and to refine policy based on that experience. Thank you very much.